Welcome again to the God-Centered Living Experience. I'm Dick Hansen, your host for this journey. We're going to continue today looking at some of the basics as we've been doing. The question we ask today really comes as a result of what we've looked at previously. The question is the God-Centered Living Experience important or not? Why? Is stewardship really important? Does it really matter? Some people see stewardship and discipleship as very similar. We're going to deal with these issues today on the God-Centered Living Experience. Now, a couple of sessions ago, I told you of some things that stewardship was not. I did deliberately withhold one item. I apologize for that, because that item needed to be emphasized in this session, and here it is. Stewardship is not discipleship. Discipleship is a very important word to the Christian life. After all, Jesus said in the Great Commission, "Go, make disciples." Discipleship is a word that really implies more of a relationship between a teacher and a student, whereas stewardship is a relationship between the steward and the master, the owner and the manager, so to speak. I want to talk a little bit about the suffix ship. Words like stewardship, discipleship have this suffix. And it's generally a relational word, like friendship, partnership, citizenship, leadership. If you were to go to a dictionary and look up the suffix, you would find three basic definitions. That ship usually indicates an office or a profession. It can be a skill in something or a state or condition. For instance, the number of scholarships available are almost endless for students who wish to apply themselves. The word scholarship indicates a state or condition that a student has met a certain condition. My penmanship was good enough to be legible. That's a skill. Penmanship, a skill. And then, of course, if I were to say they won the championship, that would be an office or a profession, a point that a team had met by becoming the champions. Well, when we talk about stewardship and discipleship, we see the same thing. These are relational words and they're very important. As I mentioned in Matthew 28:19, Jesus said, "Go make disciples." So discipleship is something you make. So the question must be asked, when does a person become a steward? This is a very important question. But there's also a bigger question, is it really that important? Well, this was a discussion that I often had with Pastor Reese. It was my conviction that a person became a steward when they were baptized, but he had a different view. And if we were to go back to the scriptures and take a look in Genesis 1, and remember that's our point of reference. Go back to Genesis 1:26. We read this: "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Don't you see? Man was first given dominion over the earth. He was created in God's image. These are important points for us to understand. Verse 28 says, "And God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.' Then God said, 'Behold, I have given you every plant-yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit-yielding seed. It shall be for food for you. And every beast of the earth, and every bird of the sky, and everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food.' And it was so." See, this is stewardship. Man was given stewardship in the garden, at creation. They were not made a steward at some point in the future. So there is a distinct difference between discipleship and stewardship. Genesis 2:7 goes on to say, "Then the Lord God formed man of the dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Humanity was dependent on God from the beginning, and it is still so. You see, disciples are made, stewards are born. The moment you received the gift of life, you were a steward. That gift comes from God to everyone who lives. Pastor Reese and I got into this discussion. I said, I think you become a steward at birth. And he went through and explained the things I just shared with you. And this is what he says. He says, every person becomes a steward of God at birth and remains one until death. I really might even go farther and say a person becomes a steward at conception. Once you have received the gift of life, that spark of life, you become a steward. You may be a faithful steward or unfaithful, in the church or out of it. Know you're a steward or not, but you're still a steward. Nothing more, nothing less. All of us were made to be stewards. This is our calling. A statement I make often says this, and remember, we're asking the question, is stewardship important? Is the God-centered living experience important? This is my statement. I guess I'm biased, but it's my statement. I'd like you to listen and think about it. True biblical stewardship is the most important aspect of the Christian's life. It specifies what a relationship with Christ is like. Without it, every spiritual discipline is worthless and meaningless. It is foundational to living life on this earth and will be the model for life in eternity. I want you to think about that. Previously, I've told you that I believe the highest position to which a person may attain is that of a faithful steward. Is it important? I mentioned earlier that stewardship is as much about God as it is about us. You see, God's character is revealed in understanding stewardship. We see God's plan and attitude towards humanity involved in understanding true biblical stewardship. Is it important? I want to say this, listen. Only in the context of stewardship does life have meaning. Got that? Only in the context of stewardship does life have meaning. There are many people I see are seeking purpose. Some of them don't find their purpose, and so they use drugs and other destructive activities to try and find meaning in their lives. But it's only in the context of stewardship. Why would I say that? My brothers and my sisters, I want you to know you are essential to God's plan. The master-steward relationship is real. God could have had his angels do this. Or he simply could have used his power to accomplish what he needed to do. But he chose you and me because it was important for us. The reason for that will be covered in another session. Is it important? Yeah, it is important. Because you're important. Many people do not understand God's love for them. Mark 13 talks about a man, says it's like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Jesus has gone on a journey and he's put us in charge. And we each one are given a work, and we're important to Jesus. That's where we are at in the stream of human history. We have been put in charge because he trusts us. You know, a lot of times you see signs, say, trust in Jesus. But seldom do we stop to understand that he trusts us. If we've been put in charge, then doesn't that tell you how valuable we are to him? Because of that, we understand why we need total commitment, God-centered living, because our goal is to seek to please him. Talk about that another time. Well, at this point, another word begins to emerge that we need to understand, and that is the word lordship. Stewardship principles involve total commitment to God and his kingdom, wise management according to the wishes of God, the owner. The life of the faithful steward will reflect the respect for the owner. I read out of a little book, it's called Counsels on Stewardship, this statement. It is my all-time favorite quote, regarding stewardship. I'm going to read it the way it's written, and then I'm going to modify it and do a little paraphrase that I think will make it even more meaningful to you. This is what it says. A steward identifies himself with his master. He accepts the responsibilities of a steward, and he must act in his master's stead, doing as his master would do were he presiding. His master's interests become his. The position of a steward is one of dignity because his master trusts him. If in any wise he acts selfishly and turns the advantages gained by trading with his Lord's goods to his own advantage, he has perverted the trust reposed in him. Who is the master? Isn't it Jesus? Let me read this same statement, only instead of putting in the word master, let's make it more personal and put in the name Jesus. Listen to this. A steward, that's you and me, a steward identifies himself with Jesus. He accepts the responsibilities of a steward, and he must act in Jesus' place, doing as Jesus would do were he presiding. Jesus' interests become his. The position of a steward is one of dignity because Jesus trusts him. If in any wise he acts selfishly and turns the advantages gained by trading with Jesus' goods to his own advantage, he has perverted the trust reposed in him. Don't you like that? Doesn't that really put this whole thing into perspective? That's the God-centered living experience. That's what we're called to. Stewardship is vitally important to your understanding of God, your happiness, your health, all of life. Nothing is exempt. 1 John 1:3 says, and indeed our fellowship. And the word fellowship could really mean partnership. And indeed our partnership is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. And we are writing these things so that your joy may be complete. Well, think of these words, lordship, partnership, fellowship. Those are good words. Those tell us what this relationship is really all about. Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, 16, 17, and also verse 23 says, for if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for I am under compulsion. For woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this voluntarily, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have a stewardship entrusted to me. Entrusted by who, of course? By God, the Master. He says, I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it. You see, Paul had this idea that if he just preached voluntarily, then he simply could be paid for it. But he says, if I do this voluntarily, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have a stewardship. He is driven by his understanding of who he is in God and of what God is requiring of him. I read this comment some time ago regarding this statement. And it says, but his point is that stewards work to bring gain to their master, not to themselves. The master is the focus. The analogy is as follows. The royal officer or a state steward who has a commission does not get wages from the people he manages or from the fields and laborers he supervises, but from the ruler or master he serves. Paul cannot receive a reward from the Corinthians, who are the field in which he plants. It can come only from the owner of the field who commissioned him to plant. And that, of course, is Jesus. My friends, this is not a burdensome study. Oh, sobering, yes. But it will prove to be the most liberating thing you can do in your life. To understand and put into practice the biblical principles of stewardship changes the way you view life and provides a peace and joy that only God can give. A number of years ago, I read this statement. This is clear by almost 20 years ago. Made by a man by the name of R.C. Sproul in a little magazine I used to get called Table Talk. This is what he says. The building of God's kingdom, the glory of His house, and the glory of His name must, in every generation, be the first priority of all His people. the building of God's kingdom, the glory of His house, the glory of His name is our first priority. Well, we have discussion questions for you again. Is stewardship important? Just expand on that idea. Second point is, it was mentioned that only in the context of stewardship does life have meaning. What is your understanding of that statement? And number three, why must stewardship be first? I invite you to discuss that in your small group, or if you're watching this as an individual, again, answer your questions in writing. It has a tendency to find its way deeper into your soul when you do that. Thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.